So welcome back. I just wanted to share with you a little story. Now this is a really #cottagecore story. You know how much I love cottagecore. Well, this is part of the Brambly Hedge collection. Now Brambly Hedge is really, like, if you're talking cottagecore, Brambly Hedge is pretty much as cottagecore as you can get. It's aimed at kids, obviously, but it is really like nostalgiacore because these books were popular when I was a child, back in the they're sort of a 1980s thing. I was born in 1987, so it was kind of, very much in my childhood. They're still very popular today. They're very retrocore, very nostalgiacore. Lots of adults like it as well, because obviously it's aimed at kids, but the pictures are like works of art, and and they're just little books. And I guess there's the spring story. There's also, which is quite apt considering it's spring, there's also the summer story, the autumn story, the winter story, and then there's a few others. I can't remember what the titles were, but a few other ones as well. So I just thought I'd read it to you. So let's have a little story. So let's start the story. And this is by Jill Barklam. It was the most beautiful morning. The spring sunshine crept into every cottage along Brambly Hedge, and the little windows in the trees were open wide. All the mice were up early, but earliest of all was Wilfred, who lived with his family in the hornbeam tree. It was Wilfred's birthday. Jumping out of bed, he ran into his parents' room and bounced on their bed till they gave him their presents. "Happy birthday, Wilfred," said Mr. and Mrs. Toadflax sleepily. He tore off the pretty wrappings and scattered them all over the floor. His squeaks of excitement woke his brother and sisters. His parents turned over to go to sleep again. Wilfred went and sat on the stairs and blew his new whistle. The picture. Mr. and Mrs. Apple lived next door at Crabapple Cottage. The sound of Wilfred's whistle floated in through their bedroom window. Mrs. Apple got up and stretched. She sniffed the sweet air and went down to the kitchen to make a pot of elderflower tea. She was very kindly mouse and a wonderful cook. The cottage always smelled of newly made bread, fresh cakes, and blackberry puddings. "Breakfast ready," she called. Mr. Apple got out of bed with a sigh and joined her at the kitchen table. They ate their toast and jam and listened to Wilfred's warbling. "I think somebody needs a lesson from the blackbird," said Mr. Apple, brushing the crumbs from his whiskers and putting on his coat. Mr. Apple was a nice old-fashioned sort of mouse. He was warden of the store stump where all the food for Brambly Hedge was kept. Look at that. Doll's house. It's lovely. It's like a doll's house, really. The store stump was not far away. As Mr. Apple walked happily through the grass to the big front doors, he felt someone pull his tail. He turned around quickly. It was Wilfred, whistle in hand. "It's my birthday," he squeaked. "Is it, young mouse?" said Mr. Apple. "Happy birthday to you. Would you like to come and help me check the store stump? We'll see what we can find." In the middle of the stump was an enormous hall, and leading off from it many passages and staircases. These led in turn to dozens of storerooms full of nuts and honey and jams and pickles. Each one had to be inspected. Wilfred's legs felt tired by the time they had finished, and he sat by the fire in the hall to rest. Mr. Apple lifted down a jar of sugared violets. He made a little cornet from a twist of paper and filled it with sweets. Taking Wilfred by the paw, he led him through the dark corridors out into the sun. Wilfred went to look for his brother, and Mr. Apple hurried down the hedge to visit his daughter Daisy and her husband, Lord Woodmouse. Lovely picture there. Okay, cottagecore. Lord and Lady Woodhouse lived in the old oak palace in the middle of the hedge. From the outside, the palace looked like an ordinary oak tree, but inside the trunk was hollowed out to form a beautiful and many-roomed mansion. At its heart was a grand ballroom. Polished doors led to magnificent kitchens, dining rooms, bedrooms, playrooms, spiral staircases, and secret passages. Old Oak Palace had always been the home of the Woodmouse family. Upstairs in the best bedroom, Lord and Lady Woodmouse woke to bright sunshine. "What a perfect day," sighed Lady Daisy as she nibbled a primrose biscuit. When they heard that Daisy's father had come to call, they were soon up and dressed and running down the winding stairs to greet him. They found him in the kitchen drinking mint tea with Mrs. Crustybread, the palace cook. Daisy gave Mr. Apple a kiss and sat down beside him. "Hello, Papa," she said. "What brings you here so early?" "I've just met little Wilfred. It's his birthday today. Shall we arrange a surprise picnic for him?" "What a wonderful idea," said Lord Woodmouse. Daisy nodded. I'll make him a special birthday cake if his mother agrees, said Mrs. Crusty Bread, hurrying off to the pantry to find the ingredients. I mean, look at that picture. Everyone was to be invited, of course, so Mr. Apple set off up the hedge towards the woods, and Lord Woodmouse went down towards the stream, calling at each house on the way. The first house on Mr. Apple's route was Elderbury Lodge. This fine elder bush was Basil's home. Basil was in charge of the store stump cellars. He was just getting up. A picnic, eh? Splendid. I'll bring up some rose-petal wine, he said, shuffling absent-mindedly round the room looking for his trousers. Basil had long white whiskers and always wore a scarlet waistcoat. He used to keep the other mice amused for hours with his stories. "Oh, there you are, you rascals," he exclaimed, discovering his trousers behind the sofa. Next, Mr. Apple came to the hornbeam. Mr. Toadflax was sitting on his front doorstep eating bread and bramble jelly. "We thought it would be nice to have a surprise picnic for you, Wilfrid," whispered Mr. Apple. "We won't tell him what it's for, and we'll meet at midday by the palace roots." Mr. Toadflax was delighted with the suggestion, and went inside to tell his wife. Mr. Apple went on to visit old Vole, who lived in a tussock of grass in the middle of the field. Okay, I'm just going to move over to another video so this video doesn't run out on me. So moving on to video 3.